right, thank you everyone. So today we're going to be talking about how to manage apps with VPP. We're going to start with the basics, literally the VPP basics. What is it, kind of how can you use it, and why it might help your organization. We'll take a look at how to integrate VPP with Jamf Pro, and then we'll take a look at how you can assign apps. We'll give you some tips at the end, and then we'll have that question and answer time. So some of you may already be using the volume purchase program in your organization. You might already be distributing apps. So this is, the first part is really going to be that how-to, what it looks like, and then we'd love any questions that you may have afterwards. So the volume purchase program allows your institution to purchase licenses of free or paid apps. Sorry about that. It allows you to have those institutionally owned licenses so that you can distribute apps and ebooks to your users. You can assign apps to users or to devices, and you can assign ebooks to your users. You can use it in education or in business, so in Apple School Manager or in the deployment website. And it gives you some options. If you want to assign an app or an ebook to an Apple ID, you assign it to that Apple ID, and then that means that that user can accept that invitation and log in on any of their devices and download that app so that you can have just one license in use per user. If you use a device-based VPP assignment, you're assigning your license to that device, and each device would use that license. So depending on your organization, if people are going to be using Apple IDs, user-based licensing might make sense. If they are not going to be using Apple IDs, or if you're not sure if they have an Apple ID ready to use, the device-based VPP makes a lot of sense.
And then also keeping in mind that the ebooks, once scoped out, cannot be pulled back, so that's a one-time use, and you're not going to be able to use that license up again for someone else.
So now we're going to take a look at how to download a VPP token. If you are using Apple School Manager, you would go to school.apple.com, and if you are a business, you would go to deploy.apple.com. You can log in. You would click on your account name in the top right corner and click on Account Summary, and then you would click on Download Token. The token that downloads, it's going to start with S token and end with .vpp token, so it's really easy to find. And then we'll go into our Jamf Pro server. So you'll log in, go into your settings in the top right corner, and then go into Global Management, and then you have your VPP token or VPP accounts. When you add your VPP token, you go ahead and say Upload Token, and upload that token.
One thing to keep in mind here, the Apple ID is optional. It's highly suggested that we add that in. If you overwrite one token with another, VPP doesn't work so well, so we want to keep those separated. And also remember that they do get renewed once a year, so we need to be really careful when doing that.
Yep. And so you have those fields to add in Apple ID. You can, if your organization is using multiple VPP accounts in the server, you can give a unique display name to each one to help you keep track. And then you can also put in contact information for whoever is managing that account or whoever might know purchasing information. You then also have some checkboxes on the bottom where you can populate purchase VPP content so that as you purchase those licenses in the VPP portal, they will automatically be added onto your Jamf Pro server so that instead of having to purchase them in VPP and then come to your server and search for them, they'll automatically show up in your library, and then you can click on each app and scope it as needed.
As long as you have not deleted them previously.
That is very true.
Yep, we don't want to keep adding them in every time you go and delete them.
Yeah. And then the second box, if you are using user-based VPP, you can let your users know when you've unassigned licenses so that the app just doesn't stop working for them. They have an idea that it's been unassigned.
And keep in mind that's just licensing on the back end. Actually removing of the app can be done if it's managed by the Jamf server. But there are different things that developers can build in as well to not allow you to update that if it's no longer in your purchase history.
All right. And so then once you save your token, you may get a box at the top that's letting you know that it's that's updating the content. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, but once it loads up, you can then click on your content tab. It lets you know your Mac App Store apps that you have, and it also lets you know your iOS App Store apps that you have.
As well as ebooks.
As
Ebooks will show up in there if you have them.
Yes.
Yep.
My VPP license or my token does not have any ebooks, so that would be empty right now. All right, so then we have our token in our Jamf Pro server. Next thing that we need to do is decide how we're going to distribute those licenses. So the first one that we'll take a look at is the user-based VPP invitation. So user-based VPP, like I said, it's a good idea if users are having, or might have multiple devices that they're using. Maybe they have multiple iPads, maybe they have an iPad and an iPhone. They can then just use that one license. Schools can also use it if they have managed Apple IDs. You can assign the licenses to those managed Apple IDs, and in fact, when you're integrating with Apple School Manager, you have the option to auto-accept those invites so that you don't have to rely on the students accepting those invitations. It will just push it through for you. All right, so then to do your VPP invitations, you go to your Users tab and click on VPP Invitations. When you create a new invitation, you have an option on how you want to distribute that invitation. So you can make it available in self-service, you can prompt the users to accept the invitation, and you can send an email. If you have them prompted to accept it, it just is a prompt like you may have seen popping up asking for the user to sign in with their Apple ID to accept it. They agree to the terms and conditions, and then those apps become available for them. If it's in self-service, it's pretty similar, but they end up opening self-service to get that invitation. If you have an SMTP server added into your Jamf Pro server, you can send an invitation by email. And so when you do that, it's similar if you've ever sent out an enrollment invitation. You choose the email subject, you choose the email address it's sending from, and then you can customize the body of the message as well. Once you've decided on those options, you choose your scope. So in this case, I sent it to myself to see what it looks like. Since I was sending an email, I had to make sure that my user had an email address associated with it so that it knew where to go. And then once I do that, it's then on the end user to accept that license or that invitation. So once I have the invitations out, I have to decide which apps are being assigned to which users. And so that's where I do my user-based VPP assignments. So this is also found in the Users tab right beneath the VPP invitations. And you can see, I can give it a name, specify anything that I want to, any unique identifiers for it. If I have multiple VPP accounts, I can choose which VPP account I'm pulling the licenses from. And then I can take a look at my apps. In this case, I'm assigning self-service, so I check the box for self-service. It conveniently lets me know how many licenses I have and how many are available, so I can make sure I'm not overextending my VPP account. I can also scope ebooks if I have them, and it does remind me that ebooks cannot be revoked, so if you do assign an ebook to a user, they get to keep it. So always keep that in mind when you're looking at solutions for that.
Also keep in mind that even though somebody hasn't accepted an invitation yet, if they are in the JSS and they are scoped an invitation and you scope out ebooks, those licenses are gone. So they're in a registered status on the Apple backend. That's something that we want to be able to push those to the end user history before the invite's accepted, so it's available fairly quickly in their purchase history.
All right, so then once I've selected my options for my VPP assignment, just like with any other part in Jamf Pro, I have to choose my scope. And so, again, I'm scoping this to myself to see what that ends up looking like, and then I go ahead and hit save, and it becomes available. So then when it comes to accepting a VPP invitation, and I should say, a lot of these examples that I'm doing are on iOS, but on macOS, the process is going to be very similar. Obviously, the App Store is different, so the apps that you can deploy are going to be different, and there are some differences with the management of the apps themselves as well, that if you guys have questions on, we can certainly talk about that after the presentation. Once I have my VPP invitation that I need to accept, in this case I sent an email, so I was very bare bones in my email. It just says, please accept this, or here's your VPP invitation. I click on the link, it takes me into Safari, and then I hit accept invitation. It takes me into the App Store, where I can then sign in with my Apple ID, accept the terms and conditions, and then it lets me know that my organization can now assign apps and ebooks to me. Once I have accepted that invitation, if I want to take a look to see what apps I have assigned to me, I can go into the App Store, take a look at my Apple ID, and click on my purchase history. And then here I have self-service in my purchase history, even though I have never downloaded it. So then we talked about user-based VPP assignments. Now we have device-based VPP assignments. So this really comes into play when you don't want to deal with Apple IDs on the iPads or on the iPhones or on the Macs as well. Or maybe you just don't want to have to worry whether or not the users have those Apple IDs ready. So to set up a device assignment here, you go into your Devices tab and then your mobile device apps. If you have populated your purchased VPP content, you're going to see a list of all of the apps that you have in your library. In this case, I'm taking a look at self-service again. So when I click on the self-service app itself, a few things are pulling in from the App Store. You may have seen this page before. It pulls in things like the bundle identifier, the app URL, the price, and things like that. And then I have a few different options. I can choose how I want to distribute it. I can have it install automatically or prompt the users to install. For iOS devices, if the device is supervised, it'll just go ahead and install in the background. If it's not supervised, the user is going to get a prompt to let them know that the app is available to them. And if we're not using VPP, in fact, it'll just prompt them to sign in with their Apple ID, and then they'll go ahead and purchase it with their own Apple ID. You then have options about the management of the app, about whether or not it becomes managed, whether or not the user can back up app data, and things like that. And then one of the new features that recently became available is requiring a tethered network connection. So if you're at an organization and maybe you don't have a caching server on your network and you know that you're deploying a large number of iOS devices, and maybe there are some apps that are very large or have a lot of content that's going to be downloading with them, you can, as you're deploying the app, require that tethered network connection, and you can actually turn any Mac now that's on Sierra 10.12.4 or later, you can turn that into a temporary caching server. So if you have Apple Configurator, on Sierra, it's a terminal command. On High Sierra, it's actually just a checkbox in system preferences, so it's nice and simple. And you require that tethered network connection. You connect your devices to the Mac that has that caching server enabled, and then it will download those apps, cache them on the computer, and then as you connect your further iOS devices, it'll just pull from that Mac instead of hitting your network over again. So once you've decided on your app settings, you need to go into your VPP tab. And so I mentioned this before, but I can't stress it enough. If you want to use your VPP licenses, you have to come to this tab and check the the assigned VPP content tab checkbox. Once you check the box, you can choose which VPP account it's pulling the licenses from, and then you can see how many licenses you have available. And then once I've saved that and scoped it, you can see that the app record has updated. When I'm looking at my view, I can see I'm using VPP licenses. I can see how many licenses are in use and how many are available. So once you have kind of your basic framework in place, you have your VPP token in your Jamf Pro server, you've decided, or maybe you're using a mix of device-based and user-based VPP assignments. There are some things to keep in mind about using VPP. You might have already been using it, using the VPP redemption codes. You may have seen them. They're nice long serial numbers that you give to users. They redeem it with their Apple ID, and then they get to keep that app or that ebook. Nothing's really changed with the ebooks. They still get to keep them. But if you have any unredeemed VPP codes, you can actually contact Apple, let them know like you put in your VPP account, you let them know which apps you want to redeem, and they will actually convert your unredeemed VPP codes to managed distribution, so then you can then use them with your MDM and assign them to users or to devices.
And that is located right in the VPP portal. Is it the support button?
Yeah, the support button, and one of the drop-down menus is actually converts VPP codes. So they keep it nice and simple. The biggest one is kind of in the middle of our tips list, but it's actually one of the most important things to keep in mind. You should only ever have a VPP account in one MDM at a time. So that could mean that you were using it in a profile manager or an Apple configurator. If you're using it in Jamf Pro, it cannot be associated with those any longer. It even means if you have your production server and you have a test server, it cannot be in both of them at the same time, because you're going to run into issues where it's assigning a license and then assigning it again, and it doesn't know which one to trust, and so you're just going to run into a lot of problems. You may have seen this nice little dialog before letting you know that your token may be in use by another server. You can hit reclaim, and that will make everything look nice, but you have to follow it up by removing the token from your other server.
Yeah, this is just a database entry update, so unless another MDM has that ability to reclaim that token, you're not going to see that pop back up because it's still in another server. So really want to make sure that you only have that token in one server at a time, and changing that Apple ID password. So say maybe you don't know where it is. You've used it before, but maybe the person that put it in that server is gone, no longer working for the company. You can go and change that password, keeping in mind that it may take up to 24 to 48 hours to revoke it from another server.
All right. And finally, one section that people don't always see is your VPP content search. You can access this either from the Devices tab or from the Users tab, and it's just VPP content search. It allows you to search for a specific app to see more specifically if that's being assigned anywhere, how many licenses are in use. It also lets you get a list of all of your apps if you just want to see as a whole, is there anything unexpected? So it can be a good troubleshooting area or just a way to get a good picture of how you're using VPP in your Jamf Pro server. All right, so thank you very much. That was our kind of intro to how to use VPP in your environment. So now if you have any questions, please, we have microphones on both sides. Linnea also has a microphone if it's hard to get out of your seat.
Just raise your hand. I'll come around.
So actually I have a ton of questions. I've been trying to implement a weird little VPP solution at our university for quite some time. And I was wondering if there's first and foremost, is there a way I can pick your guys' brains, like just do this, because I've got a ton of questions.
We'll see how specific the questions are. If they're too specific, maybe afterwards, but
I'm gonna try to generalize.
Cool.
So what I do is I work for a library, and I'm trying to implement a software checkout program. So essentially a student would be able to come, get on our VPP, have the license for 2 weeks, I reclaim them, take the user off the VPP, they can kind of re-enroll, and essentially I'm trying to make 6 licenses go as far as they can. My problem being that as soon as you assign any sort of license to a user, whether they claim it or not, that license is taken up. So I was trying to, well, I'm not going to go into details, but essentially, is there a good method to bring these users on to our Jamf server, give them the license, get that license back, and then pass it on to the next student? Do you have any tricks for that?
In that scenario, so you don't actually want to use the license up until they actually want the app.
Right.
So we have a little trick up our sleeve to do that. How we've been doing that with very few customers that are requesting it, especially for larger paid apps that cost quite a bit of money. We're creating a web clip that's available in self-service.
Okay.
And once they go ahead and install that web clip, the app is then scoped to them and set to install auto, and then it will automatically come down when they're ready for it and using it. And then when it's gone, they would fall out of that smart group from what I remember, and then you get your license back. So that's the trick that we have.
I was doing the exact same thing with the API and servicing a little thing that threw them into the scope,
Yep.
and then it installed the app and did everything. But
Right.
that was actually, I think, discussed
Otherwise,
as a ton
if
of
you're doing
questions.
user-based, you could also wait until they've actually accepted the invite. So you can make a smart user group for associated status of the VPP invitation. I would highly suggest that with ebooks. You guys could be scoping them out and maybe they never accept the invite. Well, now you go and the student leaves or whatever, and they still have that license tied to them even though they've never accepted.
I could go on, but I'm going to take a break and you can ask your question.
A quick question about regions. If I'm managing licenses from multiple App Store regions, can I use the same license pool?
I believe as
Yes.
long as it is available in that App Store region, then you're fine as long as the Atom ID is exactly the same. So the Atom ID is the unique identifier on Apple's side, and you'll see that in the URL links for each region that you're in.
Yeah, so officially it should work as long as the app's available, but
Right.
there are those specifics.
So I played around with the differences between iOS and macOS. And essentially what I couldn't figure out is exactly how do you do an automatic assign. It's like you have your device on your iOS and you essentially have all the check marks, but without physically interacting and, hey, who are you? Okay, let me check that for you. Let me pull this off your device. Is there a way to automate the who gets what app and on iOS, or am I just missing that completely?
As far as users go,
Yeah.
so you should be able to scope to users under the mobile device apps. You don't have to scope to devices themselves. And you can scope to smart user groups as well.
I'll have to figure that out. Thank you.
So this question is kind of regarding apps with in-app purchases in VPP. Is there a way for that to be charged back to our VPP account, or is that always going to be on the Apple ID side?
That is not available on the Apple side for VPP.
Okay, all right, thanks.
So my organization is kind of new to using Apple TVs. I work at a school, so we use them in the classroom. To what extent is VPP available to scope apps for the Apple TV? Is that possible? Can you use VPP to do that?
Currently, right now, from my understanding and my last memory, it's not available.
Okay.
And we will actually create a failed command if the device is not the proper type of device for receiving that.
Okay.
It doesn't actually try to push it out, but it gives you that warning saying that it's not compatible or what have you. So you at least know why didn't this app go down.
Right, because the OS type doesn't match.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
My question is, with the Mac OS and user-based app, if you deploy that to the user, how is that controlled when somebody else signs into that computer on a multi-user environment?
For Mac OS, the apps are not managed necessarily. So like with iOS, if they're managed, we can, once they fall out of scope, they get removed. That's not the same for Mac OS. Since we can't manage those apps, they will stay installed on that computer. There would have to be some other sort of way of getting those removed if you actually needed them gone.
So the right way to do that in a multi-user environment would be device-based?
Well, device-based, it wouldn't matter either way. I mean, it's still the app going down to the device. How you get the license really doesn't matter when it comes to that side of things, because that's the licensing on the back end. The app's not going to go away no matter which way you deploy that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Chris Barth from Cornell University. Ultimately, my question is going to be about VPP using sites in Jamf Pro, but a minute of history for anybody that runs into this at a university kind of level. If you do want to talk about university stuff, talking to me would be really helpful. Initially, there was a confusion at our university about you had to have DEP to use VPP. And part of that confusion was the fact that the Cornell store, which is an Apple reseller, was something on campus that had the main rights to the Apple account. And apparently it was an older generation account that got migrated a couple of times, and basically we got stuck where we couldn't do it. Cornell is unique where we have a centralized IT department, but it's sort of like a federal government versus states' rights where each individual academic unit, like the College of Human Ecology, has their own Jamf Pro. So we have 22 different Jamf Pros where I got to keep Tomcat running and things like that. So what ended up happening is now we've gotten to a point in time where we worked with Apple directly in the Cornell store to basically redo the Cornell VPP. And now we finally got a time where each of our units are going out and now starting to use VPP in their own Jamf Pro. We're looking at migrating to the Jamf Cloud, and that's going to cause us to try to smartly consolidate all of our 22 contexts into one, install sites, get DEP, which would be like amazing. But now I'm worried about how am I going to use VPP with the sites model, because everybody suddenly just got something fancy and new, they're implementing it everywhere. And is it like, is the cat out of the bag, or how would that work?
For the sites portion of it, the big thing you want to remember is if you're doing sites in device-based VPP, you can only assign a device to one site at a time. Or on the user's side, you can actually assign that user to multiple sites at a time. So when you're putting those tokens in there, you need to be very sure that if you assign that token to a site, that those devices that are not in that site are not going to need apps from there. You don't want to do live switching of that. That'll cause some pretty weird issues. And then the other thing as well is if you want to use it between multiple sites, you just don't assign that token to a site. I believe that the admins would have to still manage the tokens themselves. I don't think site admins would be able to go in and mess with that if it's set to the full site.
Yeah, that is one of the considerations, is our layer would then switch to being like a content curator of like publishing rights for the site. So am I understanding that a unit that does now have their new VPP ID, we would be able to take that token and put it into their site for them, and they would be able to continue to use that?
Yeah, we just want to make sure that that token, isn't left behind in that old server either, because you're going to run into problems. Big first step is you're obviously going to be reassigning all the apps. You also want to think about ebooks. You're going to lose that licensing. You don't want to scope it back out to the users that already have it. The users are going to have to accept brand new VPP invites because they're new Apple IDs on Apple's side. So unless you're doing like a migration, which I highly doubt you're doing if you're merging 22 into one, you're going to have to re-accept. You're going to lose those ebook licenses. You don't want to rescope to those users if they already have it, because now you've lost even more money. And then the device space should be fine with that, but the other big thing is revoking all the apps before you push them back out. Make sure you've pulled all the licenses back after deleting it from the old server before pushing them out again, or you could end up with mismatches in the database where Apple thinks you have this many assigned, but the JSS thinks you only have this many, and then you run into issues with installing.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm running a situation where I've deployed multiple iPads to a certain unit, and I want them to be able to wipe the iPads whenever they're finished and just get back to my pre-stage enrollment that I've set up through DEP. And the issue we have is that this department really wants a specific home screen picture to show up. And the only way you can set up a home screen picture, as far as I know, is through the smart group. And there's a smart group action that's attached, or a smart group area where there's a
Automated management.
Right, automated management.
Wallpaper, okay.
And the problem we were having, I was talking to Jamf support about this, is when the user goes through the erase all settings to get the iPad back to the original configuration, that smart group, in order to get the home screen picture put on, is dependent on anything that enters the smart group. So by erasing and re-enrolling the iPad, the device never actually leaves the smart group. It stays in the smart group. And so everything else gets put on, but the home screen never gets deployed because it's meaning, do you understand that? It has to come out of the smart group in order to get that put back on.
Is there any reason why we can't wipe it from the JSS instead?
Well,
Instead of the
I
end
could
user
do that,
doing
but
it?
then I'd be dependent on them contacting me. I want them to be able to do it whenever they want to.
Sure. I mean, I don't know how many devices this is, but in the automated management section, you can schedule the wallpaper setting. You've probably seen that, but that's an idea depending on the number of devices and how often it would have to happen.
Right. I was just wondering if there was a fix for that or anything that you might know about how that gets better managed.
Well, I mean, since the end user's doing it, the JSS has no idea until it re-enrolls. And since it's already in that smart group and managed, now if you could get it in an unmanaged state, then you're automatically dropping from that smart group. So that's why I'm asking, is there a reason why we can't wipe it via the JSS? Sure, it's extra work on you guys, but then again, you know, how important is the wallpaper? So it's sort of a give or take, otherwise the scheduled.
Yeah. Maybe they could remove the MDM profile before wiping it, depending on the settings.
You can't because it's DEP.
Depends on the settings.
Yeah, yeah. And it would have to come back
Yeah.
in and say that it's unmanaged, which isn't going to happen if it's unmanaged, so yeah.
Hi, good morning. My company's new to Jamf Pro and this whole environment, so pardon if my question seems a little bit simple, but I have a question about how VPP works with self-service and the expected behavior that the user should be experiencing. I noticed that on a couple of cases where I have apps assigned via VPP, device assigned, but the user has the ability to install it themselves via self-service, that after the installation of the application, the app still remains in self-service. It doesn't disappear like the policies do. And the option is still install. And I've had instances where the user has installed the same app multiple times and the app actually installs multiple instances on their computer. Is that a bug expected? What should be the expected behavior that the user should experience when they self-service install an app?
So this is iOS or macOS?
macOS.
With macOS, it should not be installing separate instances of it. That's like going out to the App Store and trying to reinstall, and it gives you 2 of them. I know in iOS there's a button to make it not show up in self-service. I don't know off the top of my head if there's one for macOS. But they shouldn't be able to install the app twice. That doesn't sound right to me. The only thing I can think of is they're not giving it enough time for what we call the installed app list to go down to say, hey, you have this installed already, I'm not going to reinstall you. But if you can't do that with the App Store, you shouldn't be able to do that with the JSS.
Okay, and so after a user installs it via self-service, it should no longer appear in their list of apps available for installation.
If the box is available for Mac App Store apps, that's something that I can take a quick peek at. It is on the iOS side for sure.
Right.
But if it's in there, then no, after the installed app list, so you've got a 5-minute wait typically. Okay. The install app command goes out, and then we want to give it time to install. So then we've got the installed app list that goes out and says, hey, what do you have installed on this device? We'll do a check of that, update the JSS, and that's how we get it to not install over and over and over again when you have it set for install auto.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I'm new to VPP myself, and I was kind of hoping that you'd answer this question. That would kind of help me too, but it was a little bit different. I just installed or attempted to deploy Xcode. It's supposed to be a free app to a MacBook, Mac OS. And the user calls me and says, well, you know, it's asking me for, actually it's asking me for an Apple ID. I'm like, okay, well, it took me 2 days to get the done number, which I think you guys got to mention that. Done is Apple, anyways. So once we got it done and everything was squared away and I have all my information, so I downloaded Xcode and I deployed it to device deployment to the user, and I scoped it to him, and it's in self-service, and he downloads it and says it's asking for an Apple ID. Where did I go wrong on that one?
User-based in iOS, correct?
Or Mac OS.
Mac OS.
Yeah.
Okay, it could be that they're not signed in to the iTunes store on the Mac, or that they're signed in with the wrong Apple ID. So if you go under the user record, I believe it's at every login, we go ahead and store the iTunes account hash of the Apple ID, and that will match up or not match up with the VPP Apple ID hash that they accepted with. So we don't ever see the Apple IDs, we just get a hash of that back from Apple. And if those two don't match, you're gonna get prompted. So what you can do is go under the user record in the JSS, and you'll be able to see like VPP content under the user record. Click on that, you're gonna see a true, false, pending, or NA status. If you're true, you're good to go. If you're false, have them log in with the right one. If it's NA, that means not active. They either, they're not signed in, or they're not on a proper iOS or Mac OS version, which is years ago now. Or pending, they haven't accepted the invite.
So for security reasons, if we don't want the user to sign in with their Apple IDs, is there a way to use VPP to push?
Device-based VPP, don't use user-based.
Yeah, I use device-based and it's still asking for that.
If you use device-based and it's still asking for that, you either didn't check the box for VPP or you have your token in another server. Because how it'll work, like if you have it in another server, say maybe you took a backup of your instance, restored it to another instance, and now you go and push that app out, the install app command will go out because it's been assigned the license, but the moment it actually goes to download and check the purchase history of that device, it's been pulled back by the other server, and then you get prompted. So if you actually checked on the VPP box and it's 10, 12, and above, that install app command will not go out until licensing has been assigned. So it's got to be one of those two.
Okay, and I assume the application, once it gets updated, it just pushes out and updates the current version.
If you have the automatically update box checked and it was actually installed from the JSS, otherwise I believe you'll have to do force app update to make it push out, and then it's considered in what we would call a managed state. It's not really managed like iOS, it's a little different, but then any subsequent updates should be fine.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you were talking about the web crawler for the automatic assignment into that different scope to check how many licenses you actually have. Is there any plans to actually have like a VPP on the API and just say, hey, how many licenses do I have left of this bit of software?
I know VPP is available on the API. The only one that I typically go for is the accounts to grab the service token. Right. So that's something that I'd have to look at, but I'm not sure if that's something we plan to implement or not.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just, with the managed apps in Mac OS, is there anything you guys, I mean, I know it's like Apple doesn't support managed apps in Mac OS, and so you essentially just throw out the software, pull the license back, they get to keep the software for whatever amount of time until they can't update or Apple decides to take it back. Right. Do you have any suggestions as far as how we can kind of, I was talking about few apps in a lot of students. I have 30,000 students, and I can imagine them having like 20, 40, 80 unlicensed copies. Is there anything you can suggest to kind of mitigate that unlicensed software?
I would assume some sort of script scoped out to a smart group of users that actually have the licensing. And once we drop out of that scope, then they would drop out of that additional scoping as well, and some script that would clean that app up. But I would assume it would have to be a per app basis.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, good morning, my bad. I just want to check on the status about the self-service web clip. Are they working now on shared iPads, or they're still broken?
The web clip is actually a user-based, how do I explain this? User-based MDM command, and that's why it's currently not working. So right now with iOS, we don't send out any user-based MDM level commands. That is something that I believe we are working on, but it's not currently completed.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions. The first, in Jamf 10, I'm hoping that there is a way to be able to push or to make an app available without having to create a second instance and sort of doubling the amount of apps that are in your app categories within Jamf.
You mean to push it and have it be in self-service as well?
No,
Like
to
that-
either to have an app, say I want to have an app pushed out to all 5th graders, but I want it available to all 4th graders in
see.
self-service. Right now I have to have 2 instances of the app, so I double the amount of apps I have,
That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
okay?
Sorry.
Number 2, if I have 2 VPP tokens in my Jamf instance, for example, we were on Meraki, eSpark was on Orchard MDM. We went from Meraki to Jamf, and then eSpark said, hey, we work with Jamf. So now we have 2 VPP tokens. So now eSpark has their 1,000 apps in our store, and we have our 1,000 apps. And there's no way of telling from the list screen how many licenses are eSpark's and how many are ours, when it would be so easy if I could see a line item and just hover over the licenses that are displayed, and it would just break it down saying eSpark VPP owns 20 of those licenses and we own the other 3,400 licenses.
I think you can do that in the search VPP content and just sort by the VPP token or sort by the app name, and it's going to tell you how many you have, how many are in use, and how many are remaining. Top left corner of the JSS under any of the tabs is a search VPP content tab or button.
Right.
And if you do a blank search on that, it's going to bring up all your apps that are tied to VPP. If it's 2 separate tokens, you're going to see an entry for each one and the amount of licenses that you have.
But that's not where you would assign apps. So when I go to the manage the app store, and I'm looking at my licenses, my titles, and I want to scope them, I don't see right away how many licenses and who owns this app. Why are there 2 places to do the same thing?
VPP tab will show you that. So if you have the box checked for VPP, you're going to have your option for your 2 tokens. It's going to tell you how many are in use.
Again, to get into an individual app instead of seeing a list. And
you can see the
Okay.
list on the mobile device apps as well. It's going to have your licenses right there also. But it's not going to show you what token it's
Okay.
tied to. So there's multiple ways. I would suggest doing an export of the search VPP content. You can put that into a CSV.
Okay. Then the last thing, is there hopefully a way within Jamf 10 that the VPP store can be within Jamf instead of having to go somewhere else, get the apps, and then wait, and hopefully within however long, the app just appears in a non-categorized area, which eSpark has taken over because they don't categorize their apps.
Yeah, so that's not something that Apple is giving us the ability to do at this point. You can't purchase apps within the Jamf Pro server. However, dependent on the amount of licensing you're purchasing is typically when those licenses will get processed by Apple. That was something that they put into place either last year or the year before. If I remember correctly, it was anything over 1,000 licenses won't get processed until that night, and then there was another gap of them as well where it won't get processed till after 9 o'clock Pacific time. So that's something that I believe is still in play. I would not suggest going out and buying 999 licenses 5 times of the same app, because then you're defeating the purpose of what Apple's put in place. And we want to make sure that those servers stay stable for everyone.
Well, that has changed then, because I just purchased 3,000 this morning. I got them within an hour.
Then that has changed.
But it's definitely better than in August, when everyone seems to be doing that, and it takes several hours to happen. But I'm hoping, again, that Jamf 10 will allow companies like eSpark to categorize their apps remotely, because right now they say they can't. And so everything comes in as a non-category, category not assigned category, And so I have 1,000 of those apps in category not assigned, so whenever I purchase my own apps, they just kind of get stuck in there somewhere.
I believe that is a API issue that we've been working on.
Oh, awesome, thank you.
Not in 10 though, I don't think.
Well, 10.1 then.
Maybe.
Hopefully. Well, thanks so much for coming to our Manage Apps with VPP. Got it right this time. We've got another session here. IT works all summer, so teachers don't have to, starting at 1:30, so right after the lunch break. We'd love to hear feedback. You can leave feedback directly through the JNUC app for us on what you thought of the session and any other thoughts. So hope to see you back at 1:30 for our next session.